Good evening. It's 7 o'clock. Thank everybody for coming. Appreciate the big crowd here tonight. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. It's wonderful to see familiar faces and some new ones as well. Your attendance means so much to us. It really does. We've got a fantastic program lined up on the Cherokee of the Carolina, and I know you will enjoy that. Side note, our museum is going to open for the first time in the evening. This will be Thursday of this week. We know that folks have a lot of things going on the weekend sometimes, so we're making it available 5 to 8 this Thursday. Hopefully pull some folks off the trail as well with some of these evening events that we'll be doing. Also wanted to mention that Langston Baptist Church in Clinton, South Carolina, that you and your family are invited to join the Langston Baptist Church to celebrate the unveiling of the church's historical marker and also to look at the remodeling they have done. They would like for you to join Saturday, April 26, if you are available. And before we dive in, a quick update on the Spring Park property. Folks, we've been waiting a long time for the asphalt. Long enough to joke that we might have actually just done it ourselves. But it's finally here, and with our dedicated parking area in place, we're so close to completing this phase of the project. Just a few finishing touches remain, and while we don't have an exact date yet, the opening of the inn will be coming soon. Once we secure the certificate of occupancy, we will be ready. The next few months will be busy as we prepare for this exciting milestone. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our past president, Rosemary Bomar, for some special recognitions.
Thank you, Mark. You know that April, or you might know, that April is Volunteer Appreciation Month. And we want to recognize and thank all of our volunteers that help with the Historical Society. And this is the first time we've formally done this. So, of course, we're thankful for the present volunteers and all of those through the years that have helped make this organization what it is and continue to do that. And as you know, this is a volunteer organization, so everybody is a volunteer. So we appreciate everyone. But there's many groups and individuals who've contributed so much to this organization. And I want to lead off quickly by especially mentioning young people who have helped us. The Travelers Rest Scout Troop got involved with the Spring Park project many years ago when that was first announced. When Meredith, I think she was in the 2nd grade, she said, and now she's in the 6th grade. But they got excited and donated funds from their cookie sales to get recycling bins and trash cans that will go at the Spring Park area. So we are pleased and appreciate that very much. And the city is holding those recycling bins and trash cans so that they can be placed when the time is right. And so I want them to go ahead and stand up right back there. That's Flannery, Kate, Emerson, and Meredith right there. And then we also have 2 representatives from the Travelers Rest High School FFA, Jackson Jarvis and Jasmine Barrera right here, who have helped, thank you, work on the grounds at Spring Park, label the trees, and have been involved for quite a few years. And we also have young people from the Innery Career Center who were not able to be here tonight, but they and their instructor have volunteered and reproduced copies of our Echoes, some of our Echoes booklets, some of the volumes that we were nearly out of. They did that as a school project, and that was wonderful for them to do that. So those are ways that those young people have helped us and been so valuable to us. So if they will just stand back up briefly, and we want some other people to stand. If you are a board member for now or a past board member, stand up. Let's And let's hold our applause to the end, okay? Hold our applause to the end. If you serve, board members or past board members, if you serve on a committee now or in the past, stand, please. Any additional committees? I know we've got some other folks here. Yeah, here's some folks. Thank you. And if you helped as a docent at the museum, please stand if you're a docent at any time, or you have trained to be a docent at the upcoming Spring Park Inn, stand up. If you're part of a garden club or any other community group that has helped with the society, please stand, okay? And if you have given an in-kind donation to benefit the museum or the park, or have volunteered in any other way, please stand up. Well, thank you so much. We recognize all of these people and appreciate their service. And if you're a member, we appreciate you. Just stand up if you're a member too. We're happy for you. We're glad you're here. Thanks to look at this. Look at this participation, and we appreciate all of this. And if you would like to be more involved or want to help and volunteer, speak to me, speak to Mark, speak to Deanna. Where is Deanna? Right here after the meeting. Thank you again.
Thank you, Rosemary, and I'm super excited for this program tonight. I know the rest of you are as well. I'd like to introduce Dr. Robert Boggs, our program director.
Very glad to have Dennis Chastain this evening. This is a program that is a successor to one that he has done all across the upstate called the Cherokee Path of the Carolinas, of South Carolina. Anyway, so this is new material, so we're very privileged to be that recipient of that tonight. I want to say that Dennis and I grew up, he was a little slightly older than I, but we grew up next to each other at Slater. And I remember, probably he doesn't remember this, his wife Jane is with us this evening, so welcome. And I think there are other members of the Chastain family here as well. But my first memory of him was, I think I was maybe about 8 or 9 years old, and I was with his brother David, and we were down there, and he had been fishing, which amused me. I didn't know people actually took fish out of bodies of water, but that's what he had been doing. And he said, "I want to show you how to clean a fish." And so he proceeded to clean the fish that he had caught. To this day, one of my fondest memories is I did not pass out because I had never seen such a thing. The supermarket had all the fish that I had been acquainted with. But anyway, he is a graduate of Winthrop and of Clemson. He was in the sciences, so we all were very impressed with him. And he writes for the Greenville Journal. If you, I think Meredith posted one of his articles on our website about the Table Rock fire. He lives very near Table Rock, so his property escaped damage. So we're very glad that you were here and are favoring us with your scholarship, and you're most welcome. So thank you.
Thanks, Robbie. I told somebody just a little while ago, I haven't seen Robbie Boggs since he was 6 years old. That's been quite a while. This slideshow really is special. It represents 30 years of research in Cherokee culture, Cherokee history, which is quite extensive. There was a time when the Cherokees were considered the largest and most powerful tribe in the Southeast, and so it's quite a story. But before we get started, I got a little story. Obviously, people like Indians. I told Jane, I said, everywhere I go, I don't care what the slideshow is about. If it's about Indians, there's going to be a crowd there. Several years ago, I was asked by the teachers at 6 Mile Elementary, which is near Clemson, to come over and talk to the fifth grade about Cherokees. And I said, yeah, I can do that. I got a slideshow. And I'm expecting 35 kids, in a classroom. And I get over there, it's 80 kids in an auditorium, and I'm thinking spitballs and cat calls and rotten tomatoes and all this, but it went well. And then about a week or 10 days later, you probably knows what happened. The teacher makes them write a "Dear Mr. Chastain, thank you for coming to my school" letter. So I get this huge manila envelope just stuffed full of "Thank you, Mr. Chastain" letters. And I dutifully went through every one, and one of them was so special. I had it framed. It's just precious. It was a little girl, and she had taken a piece of red construction paper and folded it in half, and she'd drawn an Indian on the outside with a bow and arrow. And on the inside it said, "Dear Mr. Chastain, thank you for coming to my school. I like Indians. My mama says I'm half Cherokee and half Yankee." Can y'all hear me some distance from the microphone? That's great. Step one in learning about the Cherokees is learning what the Cherokees were not. And you don't have to raise your hands, but nod affirmatively if you went to the Cherokee village, Cherokee town in the 1950s and 60s. It was obligatory, just like going to the beach every year. Then you go up to Cherokee. And you may remember, just look at those cars. This is probably very early 1950s. You remember this right here? There was one particular gift shop that had those two big teepees. And the more I learned about Cherokee culture, I said, the Cherokees didn't live in teepees. I don't even know how they would know what a teepee looked like, because that's the Plains Indians out west. But what I realized was Cherokee is a tourist town. And the number one rule of tourism is you give people what they want. And they knew that our concept of Indians was what we saw on Westerns on TV. Woo, 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 howl. And these elaborate headdresses, and all that goes along with that. There was this one fellow, there were actually quite a number of these Cherokee chiefs, but the one who is quite famous is this fellow, Chief Henry. Does anybody remember him? Henry Lambert. Henry's story is the most photographed Cherokee in history. That's him in his full regalia. I listened to a quite lengthy interview. I think he's dead now, but I guess it was in the 70s or 80s, and he did a lengthy radio interview, which is interesting. And he told the story of how he got this job. He was a truck driver. He was driving a truck for a mining company up there, and a friend of his was doing this Cherokee chief thing and making a pretty good living, charging folks to have their photograph made and everything. And the guy got sick, and they asked Henry if he could fill in for him. And he said, yeah, I guess I can, take a day off work. He did it for 16, 18 years, something like that, maybe longer, I don't know. But anyway, I remember he said he had to order all that elaborate headgear, the feathers and everything like that, from a place in Pima, Arizona, because that's where they actually did wear headdresses like that. And he said he had to be in feathers by 8 o'clock in the morning. Somebody recently, I found this on the internet, somebody recently found his sign that he had out front. Have your picture taken with world famous Chief Henry. Seems like he had, you remember those old Kodak land cameras where you take the picture and it spits out this kind of unfinished image and you had to hold it there for a minute or something like that and it developed. If you had your own camera, it was only $1, but if you used his Polaroid land camera, it's $5. Now, that's what Cherokees are not. I put in this fellow, his name is Dragon Canoe. He's a real person. So that you could see that if you ran up on a Cherokee in the 1760s, which is probably the period when we have the best documentary of the Cherokees in northwestern South Carolina. By the way, the Cherokees always, from antiquity, divided all of their territory, and I'll show you the range of their territory in just a minute, into the lower towns, Irati, and the over towns, Otari. And Otari was eastern Tennessee, upper western North Carolina, like in the Watauga River area up there. And the lower towns, I'll show you a map that has all the villages listed for lower towns, were basically in Pickens and Oconee counties, and mostly along the Kiowee River. And I'll tell you why they almost always located along rivers in a few minutes. But that's what a Cherokee would actually look like. This is dragon canoe. You know, you see them in buckskins, about 2 feathers exactly, none of that Chief Henry elaborate headdress. Powder horn, a rope for tying up prisoners at war. Let me tell you something. Dragon Canoe was a fierce warrior, and you did not want to be on the wrong side of the battlefield with Dragon Canoe. His name comes from his father, Attakulla. I describe as the Secretary of State for the Cherokees, and that's why he functioned. He was a negotiator, and let me tell you something, that was one crafty fella. He was pitting the colonial governor of North Carolina and the governor of South Carolina for better prices on the deerskin trade, and almost always won, because these colonies, these fledgling colonies, the Carolinas and Georgia, right on up this eastern seaboard, they were all desperate for cash. And I'll talk a little bit about the deerskin trade in just a few minutes and how important that was. But the reason he was called Dragon Canoe was when he was a little boy, his father was a famous warrior, and he desperately, like all boys, wanted to be like his daddy and be a Cherokee warrior. And they said, well, when you can drag a canoe up on the riverbank, you can be a warrior. Now, this is not the birch bark canoes of the Northeast that probably weighed 40, 50 pounds. These were just a pine log or a poplar log that had been hewed out. They were probably 16 feet long and probably weighed about 300 pounds. They would hew them out with stone tools, and then they'd burn them, then they'd hew them out a little bit more, burn them until they got a cavity enough to seat 8 or 10 men in there. So this is a big deal. Well, finally, when he got about 16 years old, he drug one of those canoes up out of the river and was forevermore known as Dragon Canoe. And just to show you kind of the typical dress, this is a party of Cherokees that actually went to London and met King George III. You don't see any of those Chief Henry headdresses there. It's kind of an odd assortment of European clothes and typical Cherokees. But this was actually taken in the 1950s of a Cherokee ball player. And I'll also talk in just a little bit about how important ball play was to the Cherokees. So if they didn't live in teepees like the Western Indians, how did they live? Where did they live? All right, this is a really good representation of what a Cherokee village would have looked like in the 1750s and 60s. You see several types of structures here. One, this would have been the council house, the largest of all these buildings here. You see smoke rising out of the center. The council house was like the courthouse. This is where they would go to deliberate the issues of the day, whether to go to war, about the planting of the crops, the upcoming season and division of labor. All important matters were discussed in the council house. Now, William Bartram, America's first native-born naturalist, came through our area up the Savannah River in 1775 and on up into western North Carolina and actually across into eastern Tennessee. And he gave us a description of number one, he described the council house on Kiowee River, very near where we live. But he described one in Cowee, which is northeastern Georgia, Cherokee village, Cowee, that would seat 400 people. That's not a meeting room, that's an auditorium. And to imagine something like that built out of poles and bark and all this kind of stuff is just impressive at a minimum. All right, so that's the council house. The Cherokees had two types of houses, a summer house and a winter house. You see these little small conical houses? That was called a hot house. That was the winter house. They were so airtight and they'd have a fire in there pretty much continuous all winter long. They wore very scant clothing during the winter in there. And I'll show you how they're constructed also in just a minute. Then these rectangular ones right here, the linear type houses, had a more open, airy structure. Here's one right here, right next to a hothouse. A more open, airy structure, you know, for the summer. And here's how they, and there's a third component. Janie and I went up to Cherokee one time for a project I was working on where we're going to recreate a Cherokee village. And I needed to know what would a representative example of a Cherokee village look like. And the guy, Dr. Michael Jacobson, who owns the Cherokee Museum, not the Cherokee Museum, but one, and is a Cherokee expert, and he said three things: a hothouse, a roundhouse, a rectangular house for the summer, and a corn crib. He said every family had its own corn crib, and it had to be built above ground to keep the bears and the rats and the raccoons and everything out. So it's called a barn here, but he had the corn crib, the warm weather, this is the warm weather rectangular structured house, and the hothouse, or the winter house. This is how they were constructed. This is a cutaway view. What it was is called daub and wattle construction. They would erect upright poles to support the roof. And then here you see a lattice work in this cutaway section here. Usually they would use river cane or black birch or black willow, which is very flexible and very common. So they would weave those two together and then plaster the whole thing with mud. Or clay, actually, out of creek banks. So that's the hothouse in the winter. You see a little fire and everybody's scantily clad. This is a really good illustration of how they were constructed. This is the erect post here, the either river cane. In this case, it looks like they used I think it's called basket willow, and then a bark roof. And here's the cutaway of the construction of the, can we dim the lights? Is it possible to dim them anymore? You just get such a richer picture if you can see the cutaway construction here. There's that daub and wattle construction. Yeah, that really helps. Daub and wattle construction I was talking about. It's like weaving a basket almost, and then a clay lining out there. So that's their summer and winter house. You see the little corn crib over here. So those are the components. I don't care where you went throughout the Cherokee territory, every family would have at a minimum that. So they all had their own individual corn stores, but they also had a community chest, or the equivalent of it, and that was where the community, every family chipped in a little bit of corn, and that's if a family fell on hard times, or the person who was responsible for Cherokee, mostly Cherokee women who did the planting, but if they were pregnant and couldn't do the planting when the time came, you got to plant corn when the time comes. You can't just plant it whenever it suits you. So if they fell on hard times or whatever, they could rely on the community chest. Let me just give you an index or a feeling for how much corn the Cherokees would raise. There was a battle in 1776 called the Battle of Seneca. If you've ever been to the Madron Center at Clemson University, the Madron Center and Walker Golf Course are south of campus on the Seneca River, down Lake Hartwell. The Battle of Seneca took place right there. We have a very detailed record of that because Andrew Williamson, who led the campaign, his report to Governor John Rutledge, the president of the rebel state, colony in the state, wrote a very detailed report. He said they burned 6,000 bushels of corn at Seneca. One Cherokee village, 6,000 bushels. So I did a little research on the internet, which I do a lot, just to see how much is 6,000 bushels. When you're driving around in the low country of South Carolina, just about every farm has 1, 2, or 3 of these galvanized silos out there. The average silo on the average farm in South Carolina holds 7,000 bushels. So just short of that was the community chest component of the corn harvest at Seneca, right down below Clemson University. That's William Bartram that I talked about. William Bartram, if you don't know anything about him, was an interesting fellow. He was one of these fellows who was having a hard time finding his way in life. He knew what he wanted to be, but his father wanted him to be something totally different, and it lasted for a long time until he finally hit his stride and was America's first native-born naturalist, and wrote, if you've never read Travels, William Bartram's Travels, get a copy. He left us the most detailed. He traveled not only in South Carolina, but in Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, northeastern Georgia. The best description of Native American culture and their habits, and not only the flora and the fauna, and not to mention he was a really, really good writer and a good illustrator. So William Bartram's Travels. But William Bartram came through, as I said, up the Savannah River, came through Kiwi Village, which was one of the principal Cherokee villages in lower towns, and in 1775. And this was a real surprise to me when I saw this, but I've had it verified in a couple different ways. He said that by 1775, a lot of the Cherokees in the vicinity of Cherokee Town were already living in European-style log houses. That's 1775. This photo, I think, was taken in 1805, which is not all that long after William Bartram came through. So while what I showed you was the traditional, centuries-old traditional Cherokee villages, they were making a serious transition toward European or Appalachian-style lifestyle in a number of ways, and I'll show you an evidence of that in just a few minutes. Again, this is an overview, but what's important here, you see the council house, the corn crib, the winter hot house, and I'm sure there's the important point here is there were almost all of the Cherokee villages in the southeast were along major rivers. And there are several reasons for that. Going to water was a daily ritual for them. It had symbolic meaning. The Cherokees thought of the rocks and trees and plants and everything as sentient beings, and they thought the rivers were sentient beings, called it Longman. And they thought that there was an underworld. This is a part of their cosmology or mythology. They thought there was an underworld, and it's not a sinister place like we think of Dante's hell. This was just another world that you could visit by going through certain portals, and those portals were waterfalls. So if you wanted to visit the underworld, all you had to do is go down here to the South Main Street in Greenville, go up to Reedy River Falls, and I'll tell you something, remind me to tell you about black drink, which I will in a few minutes. And you knock back a couple of cups of black drink and you start seeing things that aren't necessarily there. But anyway, they thought that's how they could visit. But here's the primary reason. It was because before we dammed up all the rivers in South Carolina, there are certain anadromous species. Anadromous species of fish are fish that live part of their life cycle in the ocean and the rest of it in fresh water. And because they were born in fresh water, they always, just like the salmon, they migrate upstream in the spring of the year, lay their eggs typically in the stream of origin where they came from. They do that by scent. So anyway, the shad, American shad, would migrate in huge numbers up the rivers every spring. As a matter of fact, if you're familiar with the tree that was just flowering a few weeks ago, serviceberry, it's also called shadblow. Blow is a British term for flowering. In other words, when a flower blooms or blossoms, it blows. So shadblow meant it flowers at the same time or about the same time the shad migrate upstream. Well, this is a tremendous resource. I'll show you in a few minutes a fish basket where they would trap all these fish and clean them, dry them, and yes, gut them, Robbie. But anyway, that was a tremendous motivation for locating along rivers. It had a lot of benefits for them. This comes as a surprise to a lot of people. The Cherokees were making annual trips to the beach, and it wasn't for saltwater taffy or goofy golf or endless seafood buffets. They were going for several things. Number one, and this is literally number one, was they were trading with the 15 local tribes along the coast of South Carolina. Most people don't know about you see references to the names like the PDs and the Winyaws, like Winyah Bay and Georgetown, and their names are preserved in that area, but they went extinct very early in the South Carolina colonial history because of smallpox. They were on the front vanguard. They had no immunity whatsoever, and as soon as ships started sailing in and out of Charleston Harbor, they just died out in great numbers. But at least historically, the Cherokees had been going to the coast, and I don't mean one place, not just Myrtle Beach or Charleston or even Beaufort, all along the coast of South Carolina for various reasons, and some of which I will show you. One of the primary reasons they were going, let me tell you how they got there. First of all, I wrote actually for the South Carolina Wildlife Magazine feature articles for about 30 years, and so I've written on everything from black bears to butterflies. One of the most popular, I can say the most popular article I wrote in those 30 years was one called Key to Carolina. And I'll tell you in a minute why. It's about this, the Cherokee Path. Here's the quick story of how I became interested in the Cherokee Path. I told the editor of the magazine, because if you're a writer, you read a lot. And I kept reading these references to this Cherokee Path, sometimes called the Kiowa Path. And it's obvious it went all the way across South Carolina to King Street in Charleston. And at that time, Charleston itself was nothing more than a palisaded village on the Cooper River side down at the Battery, and the Cherokee Path went right through the gates of Charleston. And I told David Lucas, editor, I said, David, I know there's a story here. I don't know enough about it to write it. He said, well, take your time. However long you got the assignment, take your time, whatever. Well, Jane was teaching. She taught kindergarten for 34 years, and she was still teaching. So every summer for 4 years, we would go to known locations of the Cherokee Path, like we'd go to Monk's Corner and spend 3 or 4 days down there, and always go to the historical room. And what I have found all across South Carolina, whatever you're researching, you go to the town where this story applies, or where the origin of the story is, and there's exactly one person in that town who knows the history of that area since the Great Flood. And they've been sitting there waiting on you to come and put a microphone in front of them, and you just sit back. And so I got to the point where I had a pretty good feel for this Cherokee Path. I mean, there's stories all along the way. I mean, you talk about 250 years of South Carolina history and 300 miles. Yeah, it really was a wonderful article, but here's why it was so popular. As soon as that magazine started hitting mailboxes, the phone started ringing at the wildlife office. And they were mostly, well, I read Mr. Chastain's article, and my grandpa told me there's an old Indian road out back on our place. Well, Jane and I took the opportunity. The editor dutifully, wrote down the notes of all these people and their contact information. In the 2 or 3 or 4 years after that article went out, Jane and I found 40 segments of undocumented sections of the old Cherokee Path across South Carolina. So we are now involved in, I don't know if you're familiar with the SC 250 committee, but the 250th anniversary of the Revolutionary War is coming up next year, the sesquicentennial, and I won't tell you the whole story why, but they have asked us to GPS map not only those 40 segments we found in that period, but Jane, it must be 80 or 100 now, because I have continued to research the Cherokee Path since the article came out. So the idea is we are going out and GPSing those vestigial segments, which is a data point. And once our work is done, we have the 250 committee has contracted with an archaeologist at the South Carolina Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology who will take that data and put it on a modern map. Then we can have driving tours, because so many revolutionary battles occurred along the Cherokee Path, because it was like I-26. If you wanted to go anywhere in the interior of South Carolina, which means not Charleston, you had to have a good road. And the Cherokee Path, I'm convinced, is a prehistoric road. Some people have asserted that it was the oldest road and one of the oldest roads in North America, and I believe that's true. For example, how would you even, and this is one of the questions I had when I was talking to the editor about the article, I said, David, the thing I can't figure out, in 1700s, how would you even figure out how to get to Charleston from, say, Pickens County? If you got on the wrong ridge, it might be 3 weeks or a month before you figured out you're heading to Augusta. You know, you don't have Landsat photos or road maps to go on and everything. And so anyway, that's the governor of the colonial governor of South Carolina in the 1760s was Governor James Glenn. And you remember I said early on that the Cherokees at one time were the largest, most powerful tribe of Indians in the Southeast. And Governor Glenn realized that establishing an alliance with the Cherokees was key to Carolina. The colony would either flourish or perish based on whether or not they had a good working relationship with the Cherokees. And the thing about the Cherokee Path is that was the connecting line, the thing that allowed that relationship to occur, because there was direct communication through the deerskin trade. Not to mention little delegations of Cherokees were going off down to Charleston to treat with the governor on a regular basis. So that's where that comes from. Here's the real reason, one of the real reasons they were going. Does anybody recognize that plant? If you've ever been down on Pawleys Island, it's everywhere. Wherever there's a natural beach with an intact bush shrub layer on the dunes, it's going to have yaupon holly. It's a very attractive shrub, has those bright red fruit on it. As a matter of fact, you can buy it at Lowe's and Home Depot and garden centers all along the coast. Yaupon holly, Y-A-U-P-O-N holly. Yaupon holly. Now, the scientific name for that plant is Ilex vomitoria. The specific name kind of gives you an indication. The Cherokees and other southeastern tribes had a ceremonial drink called black drink that I mentioned earlier. Black drink was made of the leaves and twigs of this plant. That's why they would go down there and get it. It only ranges to about, I don't know, something short of Columbia and the fall line. And here's the thing about it. Yaupon holly is the only plant in North America that makes caffeine. And it makes a lot of caffeine. If you brew a tea to the thickness of black drink, which was about the consistency of Vicks 44 cough syrup, a cup of strong brewed coffee would have about 4% caffeine. Yaupon holly has 15% caffeine. That's why I said earlier that if you drink enough black drink, it's like knocking back 3 or 4 Red Bulls in rapid succession. You start seeing things that aren't necessarily there. So they were going down to the coast to get yaupon holly, about a year's worth of supply, and then they dry it. And of course, it retains the caffeine. But here's the other thing. Wampum. If you're like me, you learned at elementary school, or grammar school as we used to call it, that wampum was Indian money. No, it was not Indian money, and it never was. I don't know how that got started. Wampum is a very specific thing, and it's made from, you see that purple part of the oyster shell? Every oyster shell has that segment of purple in it. If you take a clam shell that you find on the beach, it looks like this, kind of brownish tan on the outside, but that outer layer, if you rub it on, say, a granitic rock, a rough surface like that, you get down and you get to expose these blue bands right here. Same thing with whelk shells that you find on the beach. You see the blue that's underneath this outer thing here. Wampum was actually a wampum belt. And, you know, I talked about little delegations of Cherokees going down to Governor Glenn and the other successive colonial governors for various reasons, to sign a treaty or to agree to new conditions for the deerskin trade, any kind of reason they were going down there. Well, when they would go down there to Charleston, they would present the governor with a wampum belt. And what that wampum belt said was, this is our physical, tangible sign that we mean what we say, that we stand behind what we say. You know, when you go to the courthouse to get a document notarized, and the notary public takes a little hand stamp and embosses their personal imprint, and that says, that person says, I saw this person sign that document and I will stand behind it. That's what wampum was all about. There were some wampum belts. I'm just going to tell you one more quick story about it because it fascinates me. Dragon canoe that I talked about earlier eventually he split off from the Cherokees and formed the Chickamaugas. And they lived up near Chickamauga, the Chickamauga battlefields near Lookout Mountain, Tennessee. And he went to war against the whites, just basically any European settlers in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, was massing troops. And the 6 nations in the Northeast got wind of this, and they sent a delegation down to Dragon Canoe and said, we'd like to throw in with you if you will join forces and help us in our fight against the whites up in this area. And they took him a wampum belt 9 feet long. Which, if you look at, now those are actual real deal historical museum quality wampum belts, but some are still made for sale. This is one that I found on the internet that's for sale right now. You can imagine the work that goes into polishing those they're little elongated beads, drilling a hole through them, threading them on there and all that. That one actually sells for about $3,000. The amount of work that went into a 9-foot wampum belt. So that's what wampum was actually all about, not Indian money. Where they lived. This is the map I was talking about that shows the extent. It says original extent of the Cherokees. So this was at or about the time of European contact. In other words, that would be 1540 when Hernando de Soto came through, not up the Savannah River, but really across South Carolina over to the Catawba River, up into western North Carolina, Old Fort, that area over there to Asheville. And at that time, the Cherokees claimed, as you can see, a huge area. This is down around the Ace Basin, the Asheboo, Combahee, and Edisto rivers over to the fighting line, which was the Walkabaw River between the Catawba Indians and the Cherokees, most of western North Carolina, on just a huge, vast territory, even over here to Alabama, and a little corner of West Virginia right here. Now that area continued to shrink just about every year, and also at contact, the Cherokees were estimated to be about 34,000 throughout their entire range. There was a smallpox epidemic in 1738, reduced their numbers in half. 17,000, from 34,000 to 17,000 in one calendar year. But it is useful to know because it understands why people describe them as the largest, most powerful tribe in the Southeast. The Cherokee towns, I've shown you a big view. I'm gonna home in so you can see South Carolina. But this is Seneca Town that I was talking about down where Clemson University is now, eastern Tennessee, northeastern Georgia. Well, actually, the big view is there. You can see the extent of the Cherokee towns throughout Georgia, North Carolina. That's the eastern band now in Cherokee, North Carolina. Actually, these are all in reverse. So here's the close-up view. All right, this is a Seneca town. This is the Kiowee River. Fort Prince George and Kiowee were across the river from each other. Sugartown and Quackarachi. All of these are under Lake Kiowee now. Toxaway. If you're riding on Highway 11, we said that we live in the vicinity of Table Rock. So if you're going west from Table Rock toward Oconee County and you cross Lake Kiowee on the big high bridge, that big open body of water was a floodplain before they flooded Lake Kiowee, and that's the site of Toxaway Town. The only 2 Cherokee villages that are above water now are East Otoe, which is in the East Otoe Valley, and Sakona Town, which is just outside the city limits of Pickens at the junction of Town Creek and 12 Mile River. So that's the lower towns of the Cherokees. This would have been the middle settlements. The Europeans divided the Cherokees into 3 divisions: the lower towns, the middle settlements, which would be western North Carolina, northeastern Georgia, and then the overhills that I showed you earlier. Okay, this in my quest to figure out what the Cherokee Path was all about. You remember the story? I was talking with the editor, and I had a friend, Tommy Charles, who was an archaeologist, and I would periodically go see him in his office, which was right behind the Capitol building on Pendleton Street in Columbia. And I had never seen a map of any kind that showed the Cherokee Path. And so I'm walking down the hall going to meet Tommy in his office, and there's this map on the wall. And I look at it, and there's the Cherokee Path going all across South Carolina, all the way down to King Street in Charleston. And it's so much detail. All the creeks are named, and I go into Tommy's office. I said, Tommy, where did y'all get that map? He said, oh, across the road over there at the Caroliniana Library. They sell them for $13. So Jane and I literally ran across Pendleton Street, ran over there and got a copy, and this is it. This boundary, I'll show you in just a minute, I think. Yeah, see, this shows what I just showed you: Sugartown, Quackarachi, East Etoy, Kiowee all those there. I'll put this slide in because, believe it or not, there was a time in history when the Cherokees, after the first Cherokee War of 1759 and 1760, it really took a hard toll on the Cherokees. And so they go down to speak to the governor, who was William Henry Littleton at that time, and to make peace. And their mission was, and William Littleton was really looking forward to this. He just didn't think he had any chance of getting it. What the Cherokees wanted is they wanted a dividing line. They wanted a literal dividing line where the white people's on one side and the Cherokees are on the other, and they figured that would ensure their existence in perpetuity. Here's the thing. This line was surveyed by a party of Cherokee chiefs and settlers of the white European community. This one was surveyed the following year, 1767. This one runs all the way to the Savannah River to a corner tree it says corner tree right there on the Reedy River. This one to a stone at the blockhouse in Tryon. Believe it or not, this was surveyed in 1767, 66 here, 1767 here. That line is still today the dividing line between Greenville and Spartanburg counties. Runs right through the city of Greer. This line is still today, hasn't altered one inch one way or the other. As a matter of fact, it was resurveyed about 10 years ago by a joint committee from Anderson and Abbeville counties. They went out and obviously they didn't find the trees that were hacked, but later surveys put up rocks and iron pins and various things. And that's still the line today that is even today the line between Anderson and Abbeville counties. So there's Mouzon's map. The deerskin trade, this was vitally important. Like I said, this was the mechanism that Governor James Glenn was talking about when he talked about establishing an alliance with the Cherokees. It was based on the deerskin trade, beneficial to both sides. The South Carolina became the darling of the 13 colonies in terms of London. Whitehall and London considered South Carolina one of the most cash-producing colonies of all 13 because of the deerskin trade. And when I wrote that article on the Cherokee Path, I wrote a sidebar. A sidebar is an article within an article. It's a subject that doesn't really fit into the narrative of the article, but it's important enough that you felt like you need to include it. So I wrote a sidebar on the deerskin trade. And I would not say this. You don't say something in the South Carolina Wildlife Magazine unless it's been fact-checked about 3 different ways, or you'll get a call from some little blue-haired lady in Sumter who says, now, Mr. Chastain, my grandfather told me. So anyway, what I said in there was that it was the capital from the deerskin trade, the money receipts from the deerskin trade that financed the rice plantations all along South Carolina coast. So without that capital, we probably would not have that part in our history. And another amazing statistic that I uncovered and put in that sidebar, was in 1740, which was kind of the height of the deerskin trade. It kind of waxed and waned over the years, depending on the relationship between the Cherokees and, well, it waxed and waned for various reasons. But in 1740s, there were 200,000 deerskins being shipped out of Charleston every year. Now, to put that in perspective, today, 2025, we have about 400,000 deer hunters in South Carolina with $500 rifles and $400 scopes and piles of corn sitting out in front of them. They kill 125,000 deer a year. That's half of what the Cherokees were killing every year just for the deerskin trade. And of course, the Cherokee Path was the mechanism for getting those skins down to Charleston. This is actually the price list of what you could buy. You see, you could get a blanket for $3 skins and 6 does, or whatever a garlic shirt is for $3 and 6 does, and on and on. You could get a large knife for $1, and that's how we got the expression of $1 for $1. That's what a dollar would buy, is a big knife. Here's the sad part, and it's really sad because I'm not sure the Cherokees understand that it was the deerskin trade that led to the demise of the Cherokee population, the whole population. In the 1750s, Chief Skygunsta, which is not a name but a military rank, lamented to Governor Glenn, "The clothes we wear we cannot make ourselves, they are made to us. We use their ammunition with which to kill deer. We cannot make our guns, they are made for us. Every necessary thing in life we must have from the white people." The truth of that statement is that they had sold their culture. They had abandoned their long-standing, centuries-old traditions, ways that they had largely been forgotten, and they became so dependent on these European trade goods that they would do anything to preserve that trade. Now, here's the part about what led to their demise. I have never seen this in print, so you can write this down and quote me, but I'm convinced of it. It was the deerskin trade. Preserving that deerskin trade is why the British allied with the Cherokees allied with the British during the Revolutionary War. That was the end of the Cherokees in South Carolina, totally and absolutely. Because you remember I talked about that Battle of Seneca? Well, after the Battle of Seneca, they were so devastated. Andrew Williamson's campaign burned. It was not just Andrew Williamson, but he was South Carolina. In North Carolina, it was Colonel Griffith Rutherford, for whom Rutherford Tun is named. So Griffith Rutherford in North Carolina is doing the same thing. He's heading through Old Fort. Actually, part of his road that he went to the western towns of the Cherokees is within the Biltmore Village. It has been preserved. The old segments are in there in Biltmore Village. And William Christian, Lieutenant Colonel William Christian in Virginia, doing the same thing, coming in to attack the Overhills. All three of those men converging on the Cherokees burned a total of 55 Cherokee villages. They destroyed all the corn crops, cut them down, cut down their peach orchards, burned all their corn stores for the year. This campaign was in August, so that year's corn crop had not been harvested. You harvest corn in about October, when it's dry. So they'd lost this year's crop. They lost their reserves from last year. All their peach orchards, everything had been cut down. All their buildings had been burned. That was the end of the Cherokees. And certainly in South Carolina, they evacuated South Carolina, and on May 20th, this was in 1776, the Battle of Seneca. The following year, on May 20th, 1777, I remember that date because that's Jane's birthday, May 20th. I'll never forget it. May 20th, 1777, the Cherokees ceded all of their remaining territory in South Carolina except for a little sliver in northern Pickens and Oconee counties, which they sold in 1815. So that was the end of Cherokees in South Carolina. And I maintain, largely because of their addiction to European trade goods and giving up their culture. So kind of a sad thing. This is some Cherokee plants. Cherokees were very knowledgeable about all the native plants and had uses for all of them. And remember, I said earlier that they considered the rocks and the rivers and everything being sentient beings. A lot of these plants they considered sentient beings. This is one of the most important Cherokee plants, at least in terms of income. It's one of our more beautiful wildflowers. If you look at a wildflower book, Janie Marlowe can tell you it's called, common names, Janie, are like Indian pink and Carolina pink. Is that what you typically see for Spagilia marylandica? Yeah. So that's what you see in a wildflower book. In the 1700s, it was called Carolina pink or pink root. And the Cherokees were harvesting and making a ton of money off of this plant. This is an indelicate topic, but I'm going to have to tell you that in the 1700s, they didn't have a concept. They didn't have good sanitation. They didn't even have a good concept of sanitation. They thought diseases were caused by humors in the air and bumps on your head and all kind of ridiculous things. So they just didn't have any sanitation at all. The end result was that virtually everybody had intestinal worms. It was a common thing that plagued European populations during that period of time. Here's the thing. The root of that plant was one of the most effective vermifuge agents known. Vermifuge is something that kills intestinal parasites. And so if you've got worms, you'll pay anything for something that'll cure your problem. And so they were shipping barrels. The root's not that big, but they were shipping it out by basically a 55-gallon drum, a wooden barrel, shipping barrels of stuff out of Charleston. Cherokees were making a lot of money, and the middlemen in Charleston were as well. So that's Indian pink root. By the way, that plant still grows right here in South Carolina, and I see it regularly. Bloodroot. If you're a wildflower enthusiast, you know this plant is kind of one of the very early plants in the poppy family. It has a single leaf right here. If you don't recommend this, but I did it for demonstration purposes. If you dig the root up, you find out why it's called bloodroot. That's the root. It's a tuber. Stores the energy from year to year. It's one of those plants that is perennial. If you break that open, you see that right there? It bleeds real blood, or it looks like real blood anyway. You remember when you were a kid and maybe you fell out on a sidewalk or something and you got your knee scraped, and it wasn't really a cut, it was an abrasion. I think we call them a strawberry. And if you got a strawberry, that's what it looks like. When you look at that, it just oozes this red sanguine juice. And the Cherokees used that not only in coloring body paint, but also dyeing their baskets. Ginseng. This was a root that had been popular as an herbal treatment for various ailments to the Cherokee, but they didn't realize the value of it until Jesuit priests told them that, hey, this same plant occurs in China and they're making thousands of dollars off of this plant. This is another plant you can make. Well, the Cherokees had a protocol because they called ginseng Little Man. And here's the reason they called him Little Man or Mountain Man. The root looks for all the world like a man, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a very long neck. And so they had a protocol for digging ginseng because it was a sentient being, and so you had to make an apology for digging him. They only dug every 7th plant. 7 was a magic number throughout the Cherokee cosmology, and so you'd only dig every 7th one, and as an homage to the plant for digging it up, you'd put the seeds of that plant back in the ground. So, good ecological practice. Anyway, this plant is it's like, this is river cane, our native river cane, Arundinaria tecta. And, or actually, this is Gigantea. There's another species called tecta. But this is our native river cane, and I describe it like WD-40 and duct tape. It had 1,000 uses. This is what Cherokees, you remember I showed you how they constructed their houses with river cane or black willow, weaving it through the upright supports. They made their beds out of it. They made their sleeping mats out of it, fish baskets, just everything imaginable, even blowguns and darts. This is a little species that grows up at higher elevations. There's two species of that, Tecta and Appalachiana. I believe Appalachiana's, the differentiation is it loses, it's deciduous, loses its leaves in the winter, and the other one retains its leaves. But anyway, the blowguns were very popular in the Cherokees for small game hunting. They were quite expert at it. And they would use, you saw how small the diameter of the cane is on that thing for blowgun darts. And there's some right there. But the baskets, Cherokee baskets, are just exquisite, expertly made. If you've been down to Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, out on Highway 17, you've seen the Gullah ladies selling sweetgrass baskets in little stands on the side of 178. Well, historically, the Gullah ladies used to sell their baskets on the Exchange building in Charleston. Before 17 was built. I'm talking about ancient times. They would come down from the Catawba region and sell their baskets on the Exchange building. Well, before the Gullah ladies, I was talking about it was the Gullah ladies who were selling their baskets on the Exchange building. The Cherokees were selling their baskets even before the Gullah ladies, and deriving quite a lot of income, because you can see they're so well constructed, very decoratively appealing. And here's the kicker. I'm not sure I understand this, and if I hadn't seen it referenced about 10 different times, I now believe it. They had a basket called a double weave basket that would hold water. I don't even know how that's possible, but they did. And I have a book on Cherokee basketry, and there's a whole section on the double weaving technique and everything. But that's an incredible prospect, I think. But just beautiful basketry. And these are available online or in Cherokee, North Carolina, and quite a keepsake. This is a real museum quality fish basket that I was talking about. If you were catching shad, I don't know if I have a fish weir in here or not. I think I do. Yeah. This is one of the few fish weirs that I've actually seen. Jane and I were going off of I-26 going to Chester, South Carolina, and you go Highway 72, which takes you across the Broad River, and it happened to be during a drought. And when we crossed the bridge over the Broad River, I looked upstream, and there's the fish weir. It has, I've since found out, it's been well documented. This is a prehistoric fish weir that you can only see during times of drought. But what they would do is build these rock weirs, W-E-I-R-S, across the river with either one or two V sections in them. And then when the shad were running up the river, they would open a couple of channels like right here and maybe right here so that the fish could migrate upstream. But when you got ready to catch them, you'd put rocks in there, close that thing up, and only have one opening where your baskets were. Then men would take cane poles, get up in this section up here and beat the water, beat it sticks, and drive the shad down through there. And they just reaping, I mean, as fast as you could empty those baskets, a year's worth of protein in a very short period of time. But the historical record is clear that along the Savannah River, in the vicinity of Anderson, Portman Shoals, and just all along the Savannah River and the Kiowee River, there were fish weirs, some of which were Cherokees and some of which were prehistoric. Corn, of all the plants, corn revolutionized Cherokee culture. When I say revolutionized, I mean a catastrophic conversion of culture. The Cherokees, are thought to have been in this area for about 1,000 years. That's 500 years of documentary history after DeSoto came through, who left quite a vivid description of his first encounter with the Cherokee. So that starts the documentary period. If they've been here for 1,000 years, that's 500 years. That means they've been here as prehistoric Native Americans for 500 years, and they were mostly hunter-gatherers during that period of time, which means they were nomadic, moved around. They didn't settle in one place very long. They would have seasonal camps here and then move on when the resource ran out, whatever it was. Corn, for the first time ever in their existence, provided enough calories that allowed them to stay in one place. Same thing happened to Europeans. Once we invented agriculture, and all of a sudden we had wheat, corn, other things that provided enough calories that people could stay in one place now. When you can stay in one place and not have to be on the move all the time, you can develop a society, and you can, have social organizations so that people start helping each other, and you have group projects like building a council house. It changed everything. The Cherokees did not remember where they got corn, which tells me they had it for generations, because usually when there's an event in a culture, whether it's our culture or some other culture, even if it preceded the existing generation, there's an oral tradition of how that came about the particulars of that event. They didn't even have an oral tradition of where they got corn, which tells me it was many years earlier than the 1760s. And they didn't plant corn the way we did today, one stalk every foot. They planted, this is a cornfield. You see how widely spaced they are. Their mythology says that they got corn from Selu, and that's Selu, the mother corn. You see how she's literally made out of corn. And the story of Selu is just too long, or I would tell you that. It runs for like 3 pages. It's basically a Shakespearean story of these two little boys who decide their mother's a witch. I've forgotten why they decide she's a witch. But if she's a witch, she has to be killed, because witches are evil and they kill people and this kind of stuff. So they conspire to kill their mother, and I think they shoot her with a bow and arrow or something like that. And as she's running through the woods, every drop of blood, wherever every drop of blood falls, a corn stalk grows. So that's how the Cherokees got corn. Makes sense to me. Yeah. This is the evolution between a plant called teosinte. Teosinte was actually a grass, but it had this kind of seed head, and in Mexico they kept improving it, collecting the seeds every year. They had the biggest cob and the most kernels till they got something like this, and then this is what we kind of know as Indian corn. Then these are the modern hybrids here. That's teosinte plant, and geneticists are divided over where there is actually a wild corn plant that crossbred with teosinte. I'm of the opinion that there was not, that it all came from teosinte. This is the rachis right here, which is the seed pod. You see, it's with improvement, it's starting to kind of look like corn. That's kind of the way they're arranged on a rachis, and their mythology determines how they planted corn. It's called the Three Sisters. You can see you plant according to the Three Sisters method. Each one of the Three Sisters is very different, but they all three contribute something different to the growing of these three vegetables. You plant a stalk of corn on a mound, then you plant your green, like you remember, like the what are they called? The green beans, cornfield beans? Yeah, cornfield beans that'll grow up a stalk. You can put a string or a stalk, grow them, and then pumpkins and squash down at the bottom, such that the bean stalks are here growing up the corn. The squash forms a living mulch down around the mound, which preserves moisture and keeps weeds down. So everybody contributes a little to the overall effort, and that's how they grew corn. In late August of every year, I was saying that the corn starts drying out in late August, September, and then by October it's ready to harvest, about time of good killing frost. So in late August they would have the green corn ceremony, which I think is great. I wrote a Greenville Journal column a couple years ago about green corn ceremony. It was one of my favorite Cherokee traditions, because at the green corn ceremony, it was like our New Year's Eve or New Year's Day, where you make all these resolutions that you never keep. But anyway, it's all things new. Starting a new year, that same kind of thing. Except they were very literal about it. They burned all their furniture, drug it out in the yard, burned all their furniture, all their sleeping mats and everything. All debts were forgiven. All their clothes and everything, they burned out in a big pile. I said in my Greenville Journal column, if I did that, Jay would run me out of the house. But anyway, I like the concept and I like the tradition, but that was the green corn ceremony every year and sometime in late August. Indian mounds. You've probably heard of Indian mounds, but I'm going to show you something now that even still amazes me. Indian mounds are, for the most part, prehistoric. Cherokees claim to have built some mounds where their council house was, but they typically were not mound builders. When James Mooney, the ethnologist from the Smithsonian Bureau in 1898, he lived among the Cherokees in western North Carolina during that time period. He was researching a voluminous book called Myths of the Cherokees, voluminous book, which I refer to consistently. But he asked him about the mounds, and they said, well, they were here when we got here. And you got to remember, they didn't remember how they got there or where they came from. So that means they were always there. This is what amazes me. This is a dot map that was done by the Smithsonian Bureau of Ethnology as a separate bulletin about the existence of mounds in the southeast. And they produced a dot map. Look where they are concentrated. The lower towns right here in Pickens and Oconee counties, northeastern Georgia, and on down, and then another cluster where the overhills are up here, a scattering down along the coast, but it's right up here in our little corner of the world, where at some point there was about 300, by this estimate, about 300 mounds. I suspect a lot of them are still out there because some of these mounds people think about. I'm going to show you one more real quick. This is Etowah Mound in northeastern Georgia, but this mound is in Jane and I have been down there. It's on the shore of Lake Marion. It's a Santee Indian mound. Santees are one of those tribes that went extinct very early on. By 1715, they were basically extinct. But this is one of their residual mounds, and it became a revolutionary fort. I don't want to tell you that whole story, but anyway, you get the idea. Some of these mounds were quite large. Yeah, I got it. Jane says it's been 50 minutes. Jane's my timekeeper, and she's got other things she needs to do this evening. So anyway, a lot of people think mounds were these huge pyramidal, conical kind of things, but a lot of the mounds in Cherokee villages were no more than about 30 inches tall. Well, if you're a farmer and you see one of these mounds, that's a place that needs to be graded down so you can plant corn or cotton or something like that, a money crop on it. But anyway, I'm convinced that there's still a lot of them there. Yeah, I just don't have time. But what I do have time for is, are there any questions, comments?
Question?
Yeah.
Is the stone still there at Block House?
Yes. As a matter of fact, there's a great story. You're not going to be surprised.
Is that right by it?
Okay, it's out in the middle of it's a hayfield. It's no bigger than about a foot across and a foot tall. Her question was, if you didn't hear it, is that stone at the blockhouse still there? Yes, it is. And I know the story about why it's still there. It had disappeared. I wrote 2 articles in the Wildlife magazine about the modern resurvey of the state border. It was done in 2 different segments, so I wrote 2 different articles about it. And Sid Miller, who lives in Dacresville, was the chairman of the 2-state boundary commission in charge of the modern resurvey of the state border. They knew about the existence of this stone, which marked the end of that line that I showed you, the line between Greenville and Spartanburg County, and the line originally between the Cherokees and the white folks. And so they go looking for it, and it's not there. And there's a guy on a bush hog who's mowing the field, and Sid goes over and asks that guy, he said, there's supposed to be a historic stone out here in the field. The guy says, yeah. He said, it's up there at the Tryon Museum. They said it was theirs, and they came and got it. Well, Sid says, no, that's not theirs. That's actually ours, and it belongs to the people of South Carolina and North Carolina because it's an important historic rock. So Sid goes up to the Tryon Museum, and the guy's real huffy and says, basically, not in these words, but he basically said possession is 90% of the law, and we own it. You know, it's ours. And they've got it mounted out there in the yard at the Tryon Museum. So the next day, Sid calls the governor. And the governor says, you go tell that young fella that if he doesn't give you that stone, I'm going to be up there with a delegation of folks to take that stone. So Sid goes up there and tells him kind of a version of that, and the guy's still real huffy. He says, no, it's ours, and it's right here. You can come get it if you want to, but I'm not giving it to you. Well, about 2 hours after that meeting, the guy calls Sid on his cell phone and says, come get your rock. Apparently he had called his superiors and they said, give the guy his rock. We're not going to war with South Carolina over this thing. So, yes, it's still there. It has been. Oh, the end of that story is Sid didn't realize it at the time, but somebody at some point in history, it's a flat rock and it was face oriented, according to the T intersection, and somebody had put two pieces of rebar, one at each side, so that they were able to put it back in its original orientation. Great story. Anybody else?
What is that Fort something? That Martin?
Yeah, that's called Fort Watson. She's asking, is that a fort? It was a Revolutionary fort called Fort Watson. Have you ever heard of?
I can't read it.
Okay. Yeah, no.
W.
I'm hoping, yeah, here we go.
Watson, thank you.
Fort Watson, yeah. I'll tell you the quick story because it's hilarious. And a turning point of the Revolutionary War, the British controlled flowing up and down the Santee River, which was only about 150 yards from this mound. And so the British had occupied this mound with cannons and men and had it palisaded around the top to defend it, because as long as they controlled the flow up and down the Santee River, you couldn't resupply Patriot troops anywhere above that point. That was a real problem. So General Charles Lee, who was in charge of the Southern Department, sent Francis Berry and the Swamp Fox and Light Horse Harry Lee up there to take Fort Watson. So they go up there and they look at the situation and he says, when you got the high ground in a battle, you've already won. You can't overwhelm somebody who occupies the high ground. So there was a Lieutenant Mahan, Thomas Mahan, I think, who was in the engineering corps, and he said, I have an idea. He said, tonight we're going to build something which later became known as Mahan's Tower. They built a tower during the night a little bit higher than the top of Watson's Mound. So the next morning, the British wake up, and I remember one of the soldiers in his diary said, they could see the literal buckles on my shoes, and so the British surrendered without a shot being fired. They said, okay, you win. They they just cut down logs and built a square thing till it get kind of like a wedding cake, the base was this wide and then it got down. And they had men up there ready to fire, and the guy said, we give up. So that's the story of Mahan's Tower. And
Dennis, did the Cherokees build smaller mounds for burial?
Yeah, rock mounds.
Stone?
Rock mounds, yeah, Karen.
Because there's a bunch on Chestnut Ridge.
Yeah, I remember you and I talked about the stone cairns. Cherokees had a long-standing tradition, I think this goes back generations, that if a Cherokee was killed some distance from his home village or town, like marching from one place to another, whether it was in battle or he got bit by a rattlesnake or something, wherever he died, they didn't bury him. They didn't have digging tools with them, anything to dig with, so they would just put the body on top of the ground and they would pile rocks on top of it, sometimes rocks and logs and stuff like that to keep the bears, and we had red wolves at that time too, to protect the body until it had sufficiently decayed and that kind of stuff. And here's the thing, that might start out being 18 to 2 inches tall, however many rocks they could gather. The Cherokee tradition was that every Cherokee that passed that point ad infinitum would add at least a rock to that pile. And so it was like an obligation. If you encountered one, you got to go looking for a rock. And so some of these mounds ended up being, we've looked at one suspected mound in the Travelers Rest area that was, at least 12 feet across, and I suspect historically had been much higher than that, but it's now only about not very high. But anyway, I have seen a lot of them that have been robbed because people are, sure that there's a dead Cherokee and all of his artifacts and pottery and all this kind of stuff in there. There seldom is, because those remains are long gone. That was 400 years ago, y'all. There's nothing there. But anyway, people will rob them and tear them down. But yeah, there are still, it's called a cairn, like the woman's name Karen, with emphasis on cairn. Cairn is how it's pronounced, C-A-I-R-N. Yeah.
I've heard people on hunting lands finding caches of like stone tools there,
Yeah.
knives, things like that.
Yeah.
Did the Cherokees have funeral pyres? Did they cache stuff or along the trail or whatever?
No, I think what you're probably referring to is quite common, and it wasn't the Cherokees, but about 4,000 years ago, archaeologists recognized a period, they call it the quartz industry. A lot of these white, milky quartz artifacts, whether it's arrowheads, atlatl points, whatever they are, were manufactured out of quartz because it's its crystalline structure is very amenable to being flaked and producing a sharp edge. So there was a quartz industry. I have found several of these scatters, quarries is what archaeologists call them, a quartz quarry. As a matter of fact, Jane and I were down mapping not the Cherokee path, but a path from Fort Charlotte near Carmel, South Carolina, to Charleston, and the archaeologist Jim Bates down there that's the Long Canes Division of the Sumter National Forest. Jim was helping us. He was sending us LiDAR images of what we had found to see if it was a real deal or not. And he showed me an aerial photograph that the U.S. Forest Service had done of a forest area there, which in other words it's been clear cut, so there's no tree cover or anything like that when the aerial photograph was done. You could see these quartz quarries because they stood out. They were white, and they were all over the place. Quartz was a very valuable, workable stone, so wherever it occurred, they're going to take advantage of that. I think that's where you would find a concentration of artifacts. Okay, yeah.
Cherokee County.
Right, yeah. Anybody else? Yes.
How did the Cherokee affect Travelers Rest? Were they in this area?
Absolutely they were.
I grew up right over here next to Ace Hardware.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's a little creek that goes through there. And when we were children, we would find arrowheads in the creek.
Yeah.
So were there a lot of them around here, or were they just traveling through? Because they seem to be focused more over in Oconee.
I think it's a little of both, traveling through, and this was very close to all the lower towns. And I have two friends, John and Herman Walker, who live on the old C. Douglas Wilson farm on 414. There are so many Indian artifacts up there in their yard that Tommy Charles, my archaeologist friend, did an excavation and got a huge publication out of it. They found artifacts going back 10,000 years up there. Now, there are a couple things going on here. When you find artifacts in the Travelers Rest area, and this is true for South Carolina, but particularly in the upcountry of South Carolina, keep this in mind. The Cherokees, as I've said, are recognized. Archaeologists don't agree on a lot, but I think there's good agreement the Cherokees have been here for about 1,000 years. We have good, rock-solid charcoal carbon-14 dating in the upcountry of South Carolina for Native American occupation of this area that goes back 14,000 years. So you got Native American occupation making stone tools for 14,000 years. You got Cherokees were here for 1,000 years. So when you pick up an artifact, an arrowhead or an atlatl point or a spear point or something like that, there's a 90% chance it's prehistoric. But in terms of the Cherokees, yes, they not only hunted in this area, but there are Cherokee paths all through. The Buncombe Road, the old Buncombe Road right out here, runs behind the spring, or in front of the Spring Park Inn. That's definitely a Cherokee path, a Cherokee trading path that went all the way to Augusta.
Was this one little spot that used to find kind of a cool area?
Yeah.
So I guess where they would camp, I think.
Yeah, there were regular campsites. You know, they were out harvesting deer, and you'd skin them out and do that. And you'd have a hunt camp. It may have been along a stream that had shad in it, and they were fishing there for various reasons. They harvested hickory nuts a lot, and if there was a hickory nut grove there, that would be enough for them to come back regularly to. You know, if you're harvesting hickory nuts and there's a grove of them, that's a real attraction. You get a lot of reward for very little effort right there together. So. Yes, I don't. It's just keep in mind that there's a 10% chance if you find artifacts that they're Cherokee and a 90% chance that they're prehistoric. And prehistoric Native Americans, as I said earlier, were largely hunter-gatherers. Now, they would have seasonal hunt camps and move around. They were largely nomadic. We had eastern bison during that period of time and elk up until 1756. So those are both grazing animals that migrate. They'd follow those herds around. So that's why you're going to find concentration of our artifacts is there probably was a seasonal hunt camp. We just don't have any documentary record of an established Cherokee village outside the ones I just showed you. Yeah.
One more question?
One more? Yeah.
You didn't mention anything about the Trail of Tears, the forced march of the Cherokee to Oklahoma.
Right.
Do you have any comments about that? Maybe how many of them were on this march to Oklahoma?
Yeah, I'll just give you a couple of observations. Is number one, Andrew Jackson was the one who ordered the Trail of Tears in 1838, and nobody understands why. Juddakula, a Cherokee chief from western North Carolina, had saved Andrew Jackson's life at the Battle of New Orleans, 1812. And nobody understood why Andrew Jackson would do that. But the Cherokees were sophisticated to the point that they sued when Andrew Jackson issued his order to have all the Cherokees carried out to or driven out to Oklahoma, they sued and went to the Supreme Court and won. And Andrew Jackson famously said, fine, let them enforce it. And of course, as we all know now, the Supreme Court has no way to enforce their rulings. So it had happened. That's the only explanation I know for it. The other thing that probably motivated it is gold had been discovered in northeastern Georgia. And of course, land values were up. But it's kind of a mystery. And I think even historians are perplexed that of all the presidents, Andrew Jackson would be the one to do that. A Cherokee chief saved his life. Folks, we have really, really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Didn't the Cherokee Sequoia do the first written?
Yes. The Cherokees did not have a written language until 1820 when Sequoia invented not an alphabet but a syllabary. And that allowed them for the first time in their history to have written communication. And they published a newspaper, the Phoenix, within a few years. His syllabary was so understandable that every Cherokee could understand what the symbols meant, what sounds went with them. And you talk about things that revolutionized Cherokee culture. They were able to sue in the Supreme Court not that long after. The alphabet comes along in 1820, it's 1838 that they're suing in the Supreme Court. So you talk about things that changed their culture. Sequoia's alphabet is one of those. Folks, it's getting late. We've enjoyed it.